This week on Another Brother.
I think maybe where we've fallen a little short so far is kind of setting up what exactly the canyon is like as a place. Then we started doing some research. Then we started finding stories. Then we started to find what might be the worst story I've ever come upon. That's what you're about to hear. Beware the Hobo Witch of Provo.
Brother over here, brother over there, brother everywhere. Another brother!
As the technical producer of the podcast, I have the privilege of getting to edit the episodes that we put out, which means I'm listening to them more than the other two, which kind of helps me have a perspective on how the storytelling is going between episodes and things like that, which puts me in an especially empowered position for this interview, because I kind of got to hear where maybe some of the storytelling wasn't quite clear enough. And I hope to be able to clear up some of those things with my interview. I think maybe where we've fallen a little short so far is kind of setting up what exactly the canyon is like as a place. I'm not sure that the canyons that hikers in Utah enjoy are a common feature of the geology of most places in the world. So I want to make sure that the environment that this story is taking place in is a little more clear. So I'm going to start there. So those who don't know, Utah is kind of like a high desert kind of biome. It's not really like a cactusy kind of desert, though there may be portions of southern Utah that see some cactus. Provo is kind of in the central to northern portion of Utah. And that sees a lot of cottonwoods as far as trees go. Cottonwoods, some white fir. Aspens are also common at higher elevations. You can find some aspens hiking in the canyon, but you do have to do a decent amount of ascension. You have to go pretty deep back into the canyon, because as you go deeper into the canyon, you're also hiking uphill in that process. Scrub oak is another type of tree that is common, and there's a lot of scrub oak in the canyon. Scrub oak are different from a normal oak tree in that instead of having what you might call one monolithic oak, one distinct tree that has a decently thick trunk and then a bunch of branches to create its canopy, scrub oak grow in clusters of thinner trunks. And the mouth of the canyon, which is very wide, has a lot of these scrub oak spread out all across what you might call the basin, or the wider, flatter area that is the mouth of the canyon. Rock Canyon is a canyon that stretches going eastward into this mountain ridge that runs more or less north to south. When I grew up in Oregon, what I thought of as a mountain is very different than what I've been told people in places like Utah and Idaho think of as a mountain. When I thought of a mountain as a kid, I thought of Mount Hood, which was close-ish by where I grew up, or Mount Rainier, or for those that are familiar with Lord of the Rings, Mount Doom. To me, these mountains were mountains because they were individual prominences. a single giant piece of stone that was a mountain. I grew up and learned that that kind of mountain is usually volcanic and is not really the most common type of mountain in the world. A lot of mountains are created in long ridges, and every now and then along this ridge, there's a local high point that is often called a peak and given a name, and that peak is that mountain, and that is that mountain. And I had a really hard time adjusting to that because, I mean, it's one long wall of rock. How are you pulling out a single mountain from that? But that doesn't really matter for the story. But the mountain range that this canyon is a part of is one of these tectonic wrinkles, one of those long ridges of mountain that has peaks here and there that are given names. Being in the canyon is kind of like being in the Grand Canyon, sort of, in many ways, but not in every way. The walls are very steep, like the Grand Canyon. You can see different layers of rock, though the ones in Rock Canyon are not really quite as colorful as the often red rock of Grand Canyon. And I think also, unlike the Grand Canyon, you can see a lot of undulation in these layers of rock in Rock Canyon. You can definitely see the crazy geologic processes that pushed this rock up into the air and created the mountain ridge. It's pretty cool. It's also fairly jagged. You can see a lot of jagged peaks and valleys along the top of the ridge of the canyon. And the canyon itself, Rock Canyon specifically is what I'm talking about, is not very wide. The very bottom of it, except for the mouth, the bottom of the canyon it ranges from maybe 100 feet wide to more like 30 feet wide. And the trail that you can follow up the canyon runs most of the time right next to a creek, what I would call a creek, having grown up around lots of creeks and rivers. To someone that maybe grew up in the desert, like someone that grew up in Utah, maybe creek sounds too small for how significant a water source this creek was for the area. I don't know. But I would call it a creek. It's usually about 10 feet wide, maybe a little wider at places, 15, 20 feet in some places. And it's often dry. It just kind of depends on how much snow came the previous winter. The trail usually follows alongside this creek. So I'm going to try to now describe what it's like entering the canyon at the mouth. So as you look at this mountain ridge from in town, in Provo, it looks more or less like a single wall of stone that stretches more or less north to south. And you don't really see too many places where it maybe folds in on itself. It kind of looks like just a solid wall of rock. Like picture the stone where the Black Gate is set. The Black Gate into Mordor in The Lord of the Rings. Except the mountains are much taller than that. But as you drive up this foothill towards the parking lot to start at the trailhead of Rock Canyon, as the houses and landscapes kind of start to fall away as you get closer, you see how this wall of stone has definitely folded inward, giving you access past the wall. You park your car and you're surrounded by scrub oak, these weird arms that grow no more than maybe a foot or a foot and a half a meter away from each other. Just big clusters of these arms, very close together. that grow to maybe 10 feet and have a little bit of branching up at the top with some oak leaves. You get out of your car, you follow the asphalt to where there's a gate to stop vehicles from going any further. And as you go past the gate onto the compacted gravel trail, you see how wide the mouth of the canyon is. And as you look from left to right, you see these very steep, very tall stone walls with those stripes and layers moving up and down in sharp angles, showcasing the pretty hectic geologic forces that used to be part of the world in Utah. And you see at the bottom of these walls is often a relatively steep slope of what looks like just piled, crushed rock, almost like at a construction site where they've dumped a bunch of gravel or something. And through the scrub oak that's spread all over the bottom of the mouth of the canyon, you can see a couple trails snaking their way through. And you can definitely see, as you follow those trails through the scrub oak, that the walls of the canyon close in to a much narrower space. As you start to head up into the canyon with the scrub oak coming up around you on either side, you get this almost claustrophobic feeling. The arms of these scrub oak trunks, I call them arms because they're about the width of a human forearm, and they kind of remind me of the creepiest enemy that I've ever seen put into a Legend of Zelda video game. In the game Ocarina of Time, there's this very creepy dungeon at the bottom of a well that has these very pale, white, very long arms sticking up out of the ground everywhere, and if you get too close, they'll grab you and hold you in place for some other disgusting monster to come gnaw on you. And that's what it reminded me of, these scrub oak. They reach up above your head, almost surrounding you, not quite covering up the sky above you. And it just feels like one of them could reach out and grab you at any moment. But eventually, these several different meandering trails that cut through the scrub oak meet and converge into one main trail that's usually about 6 feet wide. As you start to hike up the main trail, on your right, you're either going to have that steep piled rock that Josh and I guess apparently military people would call scree, that loose rock, or sheer, almost completely vertical stone, the face of the canyon, or sometimes very steep, compacted earth that plants are able to grow in once they get up a little higher past the really steep part, and you can see their roots coming out of the sides of this compacted earth. And for a while, on your left is the creek. And the depth of the creek, as you hike up the canyon, kind of fluctuates. It can range from anywhere between maybe 15 feet and maybe even only a foot deep. And as you're going, you see a lot of scrub oak, a lot of different types of shrubs. A lot of the evergreen plants in the canyon have leaves that have a waxy texture and look to them. They're kind of shiny. And that waxiness helps to keep moisture inside the plant since it's a fairly precious resource in Utah. You're hiking uphill. Every now and then the trail will level out a little bit. You're seeing some maple trees here and there. Every now and then a coniferous tree of some kind, probably probably a white fir or something a little more scraggly. It's a type of mahogany that grows in Utah, or junipers as well, another scraggly looking kind of evergreen or coniferous type looking plant. And it's actually fairly vegetated. There's a lot of vegetation that follows alongside the creek. And so you never really feel like you're in the desert. You usually feel like you're kind of in a forest. For someone that grew up in Oregon, it's pretty nice. I enjoy that part of it quite a bit. And as you look up past the top of these trees and shrubs and everything, you see very sharp looking stone all around you. It doesn't look old and weathered. It looks new and sharp and angular and kind of creepy. Not unlike when Aragorn goes into that, I guess you would call it a canyon, to go find the dead soldiers that they need to win the war against Mordor at the gates of Gondor. Just kind of a weird, almost alien-looking landscape, if not for all of the plants that do look very normal. You can see mountain goats, if you're lucky, high up in the piles of loose rock, or even sometimes on what looks like completely sheer stone. They're able to walk on that somehow. There are cougars in the canyon. I've never been able to spy one directly myself, but I do think I've seen the glow of their eyes in my flashlight before. That's when we just carefully and very attentively leave the canyon at night. I believe I've seen some owls out there. Pretty sure we've seen some bear tracks. So this is the environment that this story takes place in. Hopefully that helps make it a little more clear what you should be picturing around you as you're listening to these stories. To get to the experience and how it kind of came to be, we had heard some stories about an uncle who had talked to, well, this uncle had spent a lot of time in the canyon, growing up in the area. And he had stories about meeting I guess what you would call a hobo or a homeless individual living in the canyon, talking with that person. Another experience of a woman running up out of the creek bed. I think it was this uncle. If it wasn't the uncle that had this experience, it was someone else that we had talked to that had this experience. This woman ran up out of the creek, bit him on the arm, and then ran off. But he had also experienced at night what looked to him like either satanic rituals or some kind of a coven, like a meeting of witches around a fire. I don't remember, unfortunately, the details of what made him believe that it was something of a darker nature and not just a bunch of college kids around a fire. I wish I did remember those details or wrote them down. What I really wish was that I had all of the same audio recording knowledge and equipment that I have now and could have just recorded his account. But either way, he had had quite a few interesting experiences out in the canyon. And so we decided that we wanted to spend some time in that canyon and see what we could find. And we spent quite a few days, afternoons in the canyon, but also quite a few nights in the canyon. But one afternoon, we were hiking in the canyon. I hope this was after classes. I hope none of us were skipping class to do this, but the sun was up. It was in the fall, and we were out in the canyon. And we had been we had hiked the canyon a number of times at this point. We had not gotten as familiar as we would come to be with the canyon yet, but we were relatively familiar with it. And there's a point in the canyon where the trail switches to the other side of the creek bed. And at that point, there is a bridge that takes you over what could be water at some times of the year, but I think most often isn't. But that level, that difference between the level of the trail and the level of the creek is not very big. You could easily wind up hiking down the dry creek bed at that point in the trail. But there was a bridge that would take you over to the other side, and you could continue the hike up. Right around that point, very close to that point, there is one of these smaller canyons that shoots up really steeply with the loose rock that we never would have noticed, and in fact hadn't ever noticed until that day, because there's a relatively popular rock climbing route at the bottom of it, or near the bottom of it. And there were people climbing on it that day. And so we were like, oh, hey, let's go over there, because it was a few yards past the point where you turn left to go over the bridge and continue on the other side up the trail. So we'd never been over there before because we just never had a need. And the sides of this smaller canyon, we've been calling them draws. I think earlier, the other two guys have called them the draw. That's what we referred to them as, probably because of Josh's military training. I would presume that's where we came to find that word for it. And yeah, the walls of that draw were steep enough that really you'd never know that there was anything there unless you went I'm not sure, 30 yards, 20 yards, I don't know, up the trail. Well, not really the trail, because the trail technically takes you across the bridge at that point. But if you kept going up on that side of the creek, you would hit this draw. And we were like, oh man, we gotta check that out. Let's come back tonight with the camera and see what we can find up there. So that night, we grabbed my camera and one of our roommates and started off on an adventure that we were never going to forget, though we didn't know it at the time. My camera was, if you haven't watched that YouTube video yet, it was a piece of garbage. I thought it was amazing. It was a step up from what I had before that point, but it was really just a cheap Sony point and shoot camera. But they put all of it inside of a DSLR style grip, so that made me think it was really cool. It also had a screen that hinged at the top, so you could pull the bottom away from the device and it would hinge. So you could be holding it at, say, chest height and look down and still see the screen to see what you were recording. And that is essentially how I was using the camera that night. Sometimes I would put the screen back flat and try to hold it in front of my face, but most of the time I had it at chest height with the screen swiveled so that I could be looking down at it, which means that from time to time I would point the camera down at the ground so that I could also see where I was walking. I'm the kind of hiker that's always looking just a couple feet in front of where I'm going to be stepping to decide where to place my feet. But because I had the camera, I needed to be at the back of the group, or else I wouldn't be able to film any of the people that were on this thing. And that immediately put me on edge. I was not comfortable, as I'm sure you could tell from the audio in the video. I didn't love being at the back of the group, being completely focused on what was in front of me, because who knows what could come up behind me. Plus, that time of year, at night, after dark, the canyon's creepy. It just is. It's a creepy place to be. So we're hiking up the trail with the intention of going to this draw and seeing what it holds. And as we're walking, during one of these times where I have the camera pointed down at the ground so I can see where I'm stepping, a very unique rock comes into view on the screen of my camera. And I can see that it has white writing on it. So once it comes into view, I stop immediately and look at it, still through the screen of my camera. And I can't believe what I'm seeing. It clearly says, "You're closer." It is misspelled, unfortunately. It's not the contraction of "you are," but I'm sure that's what the person meant. I take the camera away from my face, and I look at the rock with my own two eyes. I have a headlamp on, so that wherever my head is pointing, which is usually where the camera is pointing, there's always light for the camera. So I'm looking at it in the light of my headlamp, and I'm stunned. This is maybe 50 yards from the draw where we're headed. And, this could have been written by anybody, and it could refer to anything. We have no idea what it really means. But for us, who were heading to somewhere specific, with a lot more than 50 yards behind us, 50 yards to the place that we were going, seemed fairly ominous. It set a very ominous tone for all of us, and it definitely amped us all up. So we push on, after taking a few still photos of the rock. We get to the draw. We turn right and start heading up this draw. It's not terribly wide. It's maybe 4 feet wide, very steep. Lots of loose rock. Occasionally there are really large chunks of rock that seem to be really buried into the mountainside, or are a solid piece of the mountainside that can act a bit like steps to help us as we climb up this thing. And I would say maybe 70 feet up this draw, a tree catches our eye because the roots are exposed on the right side of the draw. They kind of follow down the draw, but also down the right side face of the mountainside, I guess, that's being carved out by this draw. And if you follow those roots up the face of the draw, not the rock, the loose rock, but the solid rock face on the right side, you find a notch cut out of the right side wall. And it looks like you can kind of climb up those roots to get through that notch. So we're like, okay, cool, let's take another turn. So we climb up those roots, head through the notch. The notch is, maybe 2 feet wide. Definitely wide enough to get through without any struggle. And we end up on this plateau type area, not very big. I would say maybe 200 to 300 square feet. As we enter this area of flat ground, immediately to the left of you and very close by is very steep, solid rock, part of the canyon. To the right of you is a large, solid rock feature that's kind of like a large boulder that is maybe 30 feet tall. It looks like a large boulder because it protrudes out of the ground as if it could be separate from the rest of the stone of the canyon, but it's definitely part. It's not loose, it's fixed, it's attached to the rest of the stone of the canyon. But it's just sitting out there separate, like it's a boulder. And as you move in, maybe 10 feet, there's a large, I don't want to say pine tree because it's not actually pine. I think it's a spruce of some kind, actually. But it might have been a fir. I could be wrong. Wide branches, very tall. And near that tree, against the side of this boulder-like protrusion of rock, is this fire pit, with the side of that rock being clearly charred and smoked up from many different fires there. I don't remember seeing anything in that fire pit like Josh does, so I was not being as observant as I could have been, apparently. But as you follow the face of this bouldery protrusion of rock, it kind of takes you out to the right a little bit, but also deeper into the clearing somewhat. And eventually it meets the slope or face of the canyon that goes down, back down to the trail. And it's pretty steep. There's some plants growing on the side of it that help keep everything in place, but it's pretty steep. And so this plateau area has a clear view out to the other side of the canyon. And if you look down, you can see the trail and the creek bed down below. But if you go to the left side of the clearing, rather than following the boulder protrusion to the right, if you stay on the solid rock face of the canyon that continues up and follow that deeper into the clearing, eventually the floor turns to loose rock, and you start to walk over that loose rock, and it piles up somewhat, so you start to go uphill ever so slightly. And as you keep going, maybe 10 more yards, there's another notch of sorts cut out of the solid rock face on the left. And when you round that corner, you can see that there's a cave, maybe 20 feet back from where you are. And it's low, it's very low to the ground. The mouth is no more than 3 feet tall from the bottom of this loose rock pile on the floor. When we found it, I remember being a little concerned that there could be a bear or a cougar using this cave as a den of some sort, even though there was a lot of human activity clearly in the rest of that clearing. It probably wasn't likely that there was an animal living inside this cave as a den, but nevertheless, we wanted to make really certain. I don't think we really thought this through entirely, but instead of going in to find out that there was an animal inside, we picked up some of this loose rock and we threw it up above the mouth of the cave opening and let it come down the slope of the rock above it, hoping that that would scare out any animal that might be inside. What we were going to do if a cougar did come running out of that thing, I don't know. As I say, I don't think we thought that through very well. But not hearing anything inside, growling or anything, we felt like we were probably okay to go inside. As Josh stated, he elected to stay outside to protect our egress, to make sure we could leave safely, not get trapped inside. It didn't feel great leaving him out there by himself, but I think someone mentioned that we were armed with knives and stuff, so being in our early 20s and late teens in Jacob's case, I'm sure we felt like we were all fine with just our knives. So the three of us, Jacob, myself, and our roommate, duck down and kind of shimmy/crawl our way into this cave. To our surprise, you're able to, after a few feet of scurrying on the ground, stand up fully. Or at least we were. We're not terribly tall people. But you could reach out your arms and touch both sides of the cave, and your head was pretty close to touching the top of the cave. I believe as you go further back, you do have to duck down a little bit. But there was also, close to the opening, a chimney of sorts that went straight up. Noticing all of the cave crickets on the walls of the cave. I didn't want to look up that chimney and find, I don't even, who knows what might be crawling on that thing. I hate spiders. I'm a huge arachnophobe. And one of the freakiest things about hiking in this canyon at night in the fall is that if you're looking down, your flashlight is constantly glinting in tiny little eyes all over the floor of the canyon. Most of the time, you can't tell what those little glints are. But if you decide you want to find out, they're either a cricket, a tiny little cricket of some kind, or a spider. Just all over the place. Little glints constantly. I hated that. I really hate spiders. So I didn't want to find any kind of freaky cave spiders up in that chimney, so I just concentrated on the cave. It was a mostly straight, ever so slightly meandering hallway, like cave. You can reach out and touch both sides, and it was essentially just above your head. And it wasn't particularly deep, maybe 30 to 40 yards deep. And there was writing all over the walls of the cave. Nothing that I could make out whatsoever. We took some pictures of it. It looked like crayon. Most of the writing was white, like on that rock down in the canyon, on the trail. In fact, it looked like it was written with the same kind of implement, whether that was a chalk. I don't think it was chalk because it would have washed away. I think it was probably a crayon. It looked waxy. So this white writing just absolutely covering the walls of this cave, and little candles set on places that kind of stuck out from the wall just enough to hold a candle. So candles here and there that had been burned and were melted down almost to the very bottom. As we keep going deeper and deeper into the cave, having to squat and bend over just a little bit as we head towards the back. At the back, with maybe 3 feet of cave behind it before you hit the end of the cave, at about waist height was a log with maybe a 4-foot diameter that had been cut to a perfect length so that it just fit within the width of the cave, so that it could be pressure fit, just pushed into place at waist height, so that each end was pressed up against one of the walls, one of the sides of the cave, and it would stay put at waist height. The log had red candles on it that had been burnt down, and a single red silky ribbon draped over it. And that was when we started to really freak out. We did not like what that might mean. What the heck? Like, what even, why? Who and why? What is this? Why is it red? Why are there candles everywhere? And it was about at that time that we could hear Josh outside yell. I mean, it was kind of hard to hear, for me to hear what he was yelling. But he yelled something, and we all quieted down as quickly as we could. And then one of the 3 of us, that wasn't me, so one of the other 2, yell out, "What?" And then Josh yells back, very echoey, "Did you hear that?" And then I think Jacob yells back, "No." And then Josh yells again, "Get out here quick." And so we immediately start running out the cave. And it's not easy getting out quickly because you have to scurry on all 4s to get all the way out. And I'm the last one out, of course, with the camera, gotta be at the back. As I'm scurrying out, the echoiness of the cave is dissipating in my ears, and I can still hear the sound of the rock, the loose rock under our feet. But then my ears finally hear Josh saying, "Shh, shh, shh, quiet, 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 listen." We quiet down. And what I heard was a screech. It was from a woman. And it wasn't like a scream of fear or pain. It sounded... excuse me. It sounded like a screech of guttural triumph. And that sent a chill down my spine. I didn't know who that was, what the heck this sound was supposed to mean, but it felt a little bit like we had been drawn into that spot and successfully trapped. That's what was going through my mind at that moment. I did not love what was going on. So we sat there quietly for a little bit and then decided it was time to run. So we ran back down out of the clearing, turned left, down the roots of that tree, because you really kind of had to use the roots of the tree. It was too steep otherwise. Just trying to run through this as fast as we could. Our ankles were actually quite strong at this point in time because we had been spending some of our time hiking up the creek bed, which was really kind of made up of large rock at all kinds of weird angles. So you had to keep your ankles strong and in place to not roll an ankle hiking up this creek bed. And from all of the time doing that, we had pretty strong ankles. So we were able to jump in some places and run in some places down this thing without any injury, fortunately. And I remember very clearly jogging down the trail to get out quickly, at least for a portion of it. I think there was probably a moment where we slowed up and stopped to listen, see if we could hear anything or anybody following us. The sound of our heartbeats filling our ears. And when we couldn't hear anything, we continued on at probably a normal walking, hiking pace. And that was when the last little bit of this weird little tale came together, and on the way out, we noticed a notice board that wasn't really in the mouth of the canyon, but it was just past the point where all of the meandering trails in the river delta portion of the mouth of the canyon had converged and come together. It was a few yards up the trail from there. This notice board was painted brown and was bare. There were no notices posted on it, and it was covered in graffiti. And again, the one thing that stood out to me, and I think the others too, because probably, or maybe, I don't know, because it was written in white, was the word River Hobo. And we took some pictures of the board and then got out. Then we started doing some research. Then we started finding stories. Then we started to find what might be the worst story I've ever come upon. That's what you're about to hear. I hope it doesn't disappoint. I hope it satisfies any curiosity that we've tried to build up through these interviews. And hopefully you'll enjoy listening to it. The Tale of the Hobo Witch of Provo. Provo, Utah, 1976. A perfect picture of a sleepy American town nestled in the heart of the Rocky Mountains. The picturesque streets lined with old, Victorian-looking homes and craftsman bungalows tell a long, storied history of a community rooted in tradition. American patriotism proudly waves in the flags flying from nearly every porch. Quaint ice cream parlors dot the corners, and discotheque-style skating rinks and drive-in theaters provide weekend entertainment. The thing about sleepy American towns, though, is that they're easy to hide in. Shadows can loom large behind closed doors, and secrets easily slip unnoticed. In a place where everyone trusts their neighbors, no one locks their front door, believing in the safety of familiar faces. But with implicit trust comes inevitable complacency. And within that complacency, abuse finds fertile ground to grow. This is the story of one young woman who becomes a haunting symbol of the consequences of such blind trust. Driven to the edge by the very environment that was supposed to nurture her, she goes to the extreme, strung out by the status quo. Her tale is not just a personal tragedy, but a stark commentary on the darker side of idyllic, small-town life. If the surface looks calm, look behind the mask for a storm of turmoil beneath. Some of what you are about to hear is conjecture based on the stories and accounts we were able to find, but stick as closely to the facts as is possible.
Eliza Hartley was a gifted violinist and a music performance major at the town's local university. Her talent and skill with the violin set her apart, making her both admired and envied by her peers and professors alike. Music was not just a hobby for Eliza, it was her refuge and passion, the one constant in her life. Her humanity and capacity for feeling ran deep, and every note she played seemed to carry a piece of her soul, a testament to her deep vulnerability and connection with her instrument. With such natural musical talent, Eliza never had to think twice about her position in the musical groups she auditioned for. First chair was essentially her birthright, a role she filled with grace and poise. However, as effortless as her musical journey seemed, Eliza's love life was a different story. Turning talent for music into skill with an instrument required relentless dedication, and Eliza was nothing if not dedicated. Her days and nights were often spent in the practice rooms on campus, far more familiar to her than the bustling halls of her dormitory or the lively social gatherings of college life. Despite her intense focus, she was not a complete recluse. Eliza maintained a small circle of close friends who understood her commitment to her craft. These friends were determined to ensure that her talents did not preclude her from experiencing the joys of companionship and love. They were relentless in setting her up on dates, hoping to introduce her to someone who could appreciate her dedication and maybe even share in her musical passion. Most of these dates, however, never led to a second meeting. Eliza's high standards and the demands of her practice often overshadowed any budding romance. But her friends persisted, believing that among the many, there would eventually be someone who resonated with her unique rhythm and spirit.
Annual auditions for the school's Philharmonic had arrived, a much-anticipated event that saw the university's most talented musicians vying for coveted positions. Eliza Hartley had been practicing relentlessly, her fingers dancing over the strings until they were numb. Day in and day out, the practice rooms echoed with her unwavering determination. On the day of the auditions, Eliza's performance was nothing short of flawless. Scales flowed from her bow like water over a falls, each note not only precisely in tune, but also somehow emotive. The chosen excerpt, Mendelssohn's Violin Concerto in E minor, was executed with such passion and technical prowess that it left the panel in tears. First chair was hers. Elated by her success, Eliza found herself in an unusually good mood later that day. Buoyed by her triumph, she agreed to go on a date with a friend of one of her roommates, Chad Reynolds. He was everything one could hope for, handsome, charming, and polite. He drove a Ford Mustang convertible, which actually put Eliza off at first. But to her surprise, he had more than just good looks, manners, and a cool car. He was able to engage her in a way no other man had before. Their conversation flowed effortlessly, touching on everything from music to personal dreams and aspirations. By the end of the date, Eliza found herself agreeing to a second. As their connection deepened, the second date turned into a third, and soon they were seeing each other every day. This new relationship brought a spark of joy into Eliza's life that her friends had always hoped she would find. They watched with satisfaction as their once solely music-absorbed friend blossomed in the light of her newfound romance. It seemed as though the goal of Eliza's friends, to ensure her happiness beyond the confines of her musical pursuits, was just about met, and Eliza's happiness was taken to the max.
Things were going well for Eliza. She was madly in love with her beau and her beau. Time spent with Chad was bringing out a new side of her, one that was more playful and less skeptical of popular culture. She began to believe her once guarded ways were misguided. In high school, she had always been jealous and cynical of cheerleaders and football players, dismissing them as lacking the intelligence and discipline she prided herself on. Now, she saw that jealousy for what it was, a longing to be accepted and to belong. Driving around in Chad's convertible with the top down, wind in her hair, Eliza felt like she could fit in with any group of people. She realized she didn't have to be a freak to be dedicated to her music. She could have both worlds. Chad's easygoing nature and charm made her see life beyond the rigid boundaries she had set for herself. His influence made her days brighter, filled with laughter and a new sense of freedom she had never allowed herself to experience. Soon, the two were engaged to be married. Eliza continued to excel as first chair violin, despite not spending as much time in the practice rooms. This change didn't go unnoticed by her fellow musicians. While she once practically lived in those practice rooms, she now spent barely an hour a day practicing. Lucky for her, she was blessed with a very tangible talent that carried her through this newly diminished dedication to her practice. Her peers marveled at how she maintained her superior skill with seemingly less effort. It seemed like nothing could touch her now, but as you might expect from a story we're telling for Halloween, it was not going to continue this way forever. Shadows were gathering at the edges of her perfect life, and the cracks in the facade would soon begin to show.
Towards the end of the semester, the school's director of the Philharmonic surprised everyone when he abruptly retired due to sudden health problems. A new director was brought in from out of state. There was a tension in the air around the arrival of the new director. Would he be any good? Would he be the sort that belittled or that built up his musicians? Would he re-audition the seating arrangement? His first piece of business was to allay that last concern. Out of respect to his predecessor, for whom he claimed a great respect, he was going to leave all seating arrangements as is until the next annual audition. With great relief, Eliza found that the director was fairly easy to work with and of good musical pedigree and taste. She saw that many of her cohorts were fond of the new director. Coming from the East Coast, among the Ivy League schools, he was accustomed to having little soirees with his students. Though Eliza was invited, she didn't attend, preferring to spend her time with Chad. As the semester drew to a close, Eliza noticed the third chair violinist, Debbie Parker, was often conversing with the new director. And was she even seen flirting with him? No, that thought was the old Eliza. She was much more forgiving and ready to make space for good intentions now. At the start of the new semester, the new director took to his stand looking slightly grim. The room fell quiet, ready to receive his instruction.
It has come to my attention that there may be some of you not upholding the standard of dedication and practice that I expect. This is the Philharmonic. Only our best and brightest are allowed in this group. To that end, in spite of what was said earlier, we will be auditioning for the group. I expect to see all of you in attendance. You will have 1 week to prepare. I have reposted the repertoire in the hall. We will not be meeting regularly again until after the auditions. I expect you all to use our regularly scheduled class time to prepare for the audition. Thank you.
As he stepped down from the conductor's box, the room exploded into an uproar of unbelieving chatter. Eliza looked around in disbelief. What was he talking about? Not upholding the standard of dedication and practice he expected? Who did he mean, and where was he hearing this from? As she gazed around the room, Eliza's eyes fell on Debbie. Was that a smirk on Debbie's face? Eliza's heart sank as older ways of thinking began to fill her head. Eliza went back to her old habits of living in her practice room. She was determined not to lose first chair. The audition repertoire was nothing out of the ordinary, and she felt confident she would succeed. But the director's words kept ringing in her ears. Not up to standard, not dedicated. She began to blame herself for letting her practice slip. She would prove herself worthy. Chad was a little miffed at not seeing Eliza as much as he was accustomed to, but ultimately supportive of her desire to maintain her position in the group. When the time came to audition, she performed every bit as she expected, every bit as expertly as before. But this time, there were no tears. Nothing but stony faces met the final note of her audition. "Thank you," was the only response she received. This was normal behavior for an audition board, but her heart whispered that something wasn't right this time. 2 interminable days later, the chair list was posted. Reading down the list as quickly as she could, nothing seemed changed until she came to violin. She and Debbie had been swapped. Not only was Eliza no longer first chair, she wasn't even second. Not only was Eliza third chair, but Debbie was somehow first. She couldn't believe what she was seeing. Her chest filled with the sensation of thick, heavy fluid. Her face warmed and cheeks flushed. Tears welled up in her eyes. As she walked out of the building in a fog of grief and unbelief, she spied Debbie, arm in arm with their director, walking out of a different exit, quickly unlinking arms and looking around for anyone who might have seen them. Not noticing Eliza, Debbie quickly rocked up on her tippy toes and gave the director a quick peck on the cheek before scurrying off.
Eliza, known for her good nature, struggled to believe what she had witnessed. The changing of chairs left her with a single conclusion. Her own lapse in practice was to blame. Determined to reclaim her position, she redoubled her efforts, immersing herself in relentless practice. The sound-dampening panels of the practice rooms became her constant companions, the walls closing in as she poured every ounce of herself into her music. Chad, on the other hand, did not welcome this change. He hoped things would return to normal after the auditions, but outwardly supported Eliza's ambitions. Their meetings grew strained as he sulked, missing the carefree days of their relationships past. Despite his efforts to remain upbeat, the weight of Eliza's renewed dedication strained their bond. Eliza continued to work tirelessly, driving herself to the brink. She couldn't understand how others could think Debbie's playing was superior. To her, Debbie's intonation was often off, requiring quick adjustments that Eliza never had to make. As rumors of Debbie's relationship with the director spread, Eliza felt torn. She didn't want to believe the gossip, but was haunted by what she might have seen herself. She chose to cling to the belief that more practice was the answer. The practice rooms became her second home. She rarely left to eat or bathe, growing increasingly emaciated. Time warped for Eliza, the days blending into weeks. What once felt comforting now felt confining. The practice rooms transforming into padded cells of her own making, locked behind a thick, heavy door, in an atmosphere so quiet she could hear the sands of time as they scraped their way through the glass. The quest for the elusive technique that Debbie supposedly possessed consumed her. Only by mastering it, Eliza believed, could she reclaim her rightful place as first chair.
One afternoon, Eliza, exhausted from hours of practice, decided to take a break for a meal. She left the confines of the university's music building and headed to the student center, where various fast food options awaited. As she entered the bustling food court, she spotted Chad in the crowd. To her shock and dismay, Chad was seen kissing another woman. The confrontation that followed was brief but intense. Eliza, visibly upset, confronted Chad in front of numerous onlookers. Through her tears and frustration, she was heard expressing hurt, while Chad's response was notably detached. He claimed that his needs had been neglected by Eliza, a statement that added to her anguish. In a dramatic gesture, Eliza removed her engagement ring and threw it at Chad before storming out of the student center. This moment marks a significant turning point in her story, deeply impacting her emotional state and future decisions. This is also the point where we must venture further into the realm of conjecture. Dark turns await.
The 1960s in America were a time of transformation. Amidst the civil rights movement and anti-war protests, a quieter revolution was taking place: the rise of the occult. Disillusioned with traditional institutions, many young people turned to alternative spiritual practices,
Music and mysticism became intertwined during this era.
says Dr. Evelyn Thompson, historian of American subcultures.
People believed that through music they could access deeper truths and even manipulate reality.
Eliza's playing began to change. Classmates noticed eerie melodies punctuated by unbridled laughter emanating from the practice rooms at odd hours. They remarked that her performances, while technically superb, now carried an unsettling undertone and frenetic energy. She removed herself from social interactions and was sometimes observed mumbling to herself while side-eyeing their director and writing feverishly in a pocket-sized black notebook. She had also completely let go of any standards of hygiene and dress. Matted hair that seemed most likely to fall in front of her face. The same dirty, ill-fitting t-shirt and corduroy pants every day. Around this time, the relative peace of campus life was disrupted by a plethora of oddly scribbled notes found all over the grounds. They were all pages torn out of a small notebook, and all contained language disparaging men. Essentially, all men are pigs and deserve to die. This was before the days of campus security having cameras all over a university campus, so the culprit was never determined. But some in the Philharmonic knew better.
Rock Canyon, with its rugged cliffs and dense forest growth, was and is a favorite spot for hikers, rock climbers, and students seeking solitude. Yet beneath its picturesque beauty lies an unsettling eeriness. The canyon's narrow passages and towering rock formations create an atmosphere where every sound echoes hauntingly, and shadows seem to linger longer than they should. For Eliza Hartley, the canyon became a place of escape, its isolation lending a dark allure. As she ventured deep into the canyon, Eliza felt a connection to something greater than herself. The oppressive quiet began to weigh on her. In her unsettled state of mind, the timeless beauty of the landscape took on a sinister edge as the dense underbrush seemed to close in, swallowing the light. Eliza found herself drawn to the darkest corners, where the air was thick with foreboding and the shadows moved with a life of their own. The eerie acoustics amplified her thoughts, turning whispers into haunting echoes that only she heard. It was here, amidst the canyon's sinister beauty, that she would confront the deepest, darkest corners of her soul and find her path forward, a sisterhood awaiting her arrival.
In the 1970s, amidst the cultural upheaval sweeping across America, Utah was not immune to the tides of change. This decade saw a significant rise in the practice of witchcraft, a trend that puzzled and alarmed the predominantly conservative population. But nowhere was this phenomenon more mysterious or dramatic than in the secluded depths of Rock Canyon.
The 1970s were a time of exploration and breaking free from traditional norms. Young people in Utah, much like the rest of the country, were seeking new spiritual paths and alternative forms of expression. Witchcraft offered a sense of empowerment and connection to nature that many found appealing.
Rock Canyon became a focal point for these practices. It was a place of natural beauty and eerie solitude, perfect for the clandestine gatherings of those drawn to the occult. The canyon's acoustics and hidden clearings provided an ideal setting for rituals and ceremonies.
These gatherings were more than just youthful rebellion. They were highly organized and deeply rooted in ancient traditions. By the mid-1970s, stories of strange happenings in Rock Canyon began to circulate. Hikers reported hearing haunting melodies in the dead of night, and some even claimed to see ghostly figures among the trees. The local authorities were skeptical, but the legends persisted. Today, Rock Canyon remains a place of both beauty and mystery. While the witchcraft practices of the 1970s have long since faded, the canyon still holds an eerie allure. For those who seek the unknown, the echoes of the past can still be heard in the whispers of the wind and the rustle of the leaves.
Tonight we bring you a troubling story from Provo, Utah. 2 college students from the local university have been reported missing. Eliza Hartley, a gifted violinist, and Chad Reynolds, a well-known student athlete, were last seen having an argument on campus 2 days ago. Authorities are currently conducting a search of the area, but so far there have been no significant leads. Their sudden disappearance has left their loved ones and classmates in a state of shock and concern.
I'm here at Provo Canyon, where search and rescue teams have been combing the area for several hours. The search for local student and athlete Chad Reynolds has now come to an end. His body was found in the early hours of the morning. Initial indications seem to be that the cause of death was a fall from the top of the canyon. The search continues for Eliza Hartley. It is unclear if she is being sought after as a potential victim or as a potential suspect in Chad's death. I have Officer Daniel Harris here with me from the Provo Police. Officer Harris, is there anything you can tell us about the investigation?
We are treating this as a missing persons case. At this time, there is no evidence of foul play, but we are exploring all possibilities.
Thank you, officer. We'll all be praying for Eliza's safe return. Back to you in the studio.
If you have any information that could assist authorities in their search, please contact your local authorities immediately. No sign of Eliza was ever found, but that was far from the last anyone saw of Chad. To this day, people report seeing the ghost of a man falling into Rock Canyon from Kiev Peak, formerly known as Squaw Peak. The same reports strangely specify that the ghost appears to be dressed in clothing from the 70s. Those familiar with the area know that the parking lot at the peak is a popular place for young lovers to be alone. There is no evidence, no witnesses, no stories from people that knew them to suggest this. Only good old-fashioned speculation. Eliza convinced Chad to go park at the peak with her, probably feigning an attempt at reconciliation. But how did she manage to overpower him enough to send him to his untimely fate? The power of music? Did she finally find some magical technique? Of course, we know that Debbie was never empowered with any special music to achieve first chair. But that doesn't mean Eliza never found what she was looking for.
The story of Eliza Hartley was forgotten to the detriment of all who venture into the canyon. especially at night. It's said she was abducted and never found, but we've heard the stories and seen the evidence with our own eyes. Eliza lives on in Rock Canyon. The ghostly sightings and eerie melodies persist, fueling our belief that Eliza Hartley still roams the canyon, a witch in the shadows. Not only did she manage to cause the death of her former fiancé, but to shackle his soul to the canyon, to remind all who venture in not to expect safety within its walls.
Whether Eliza's transformation is fact or folklore, one thing is certain. Her legacy endures. A spectral presence that continues to terrify the unwary who venture into Rock Canyon. And to any men who may wander into the canyon, be careful how you treat the women in your life.
Beware the Hobo Witch of Provo.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Dang it, that's what I was going to do.
Oh, shoot. Do it. You're going to do it better.
Thank you.
For being our brother.
Wow, did
that
we
might be
just
too
nail that?
energetic, though.
Okay. we'll take another run at it then.
Okay. For being our brother.
That, the first one was too energetic.
Gotcha. Production of this podcast is done by Alex Stewart.
With music by Jared Poff and Alex Stewart. For show notes, rockin' merch, and other brother goodness, check out our website at anotherbrotherpodcast.com.
Be sure to come back next week.
And tell your friends so they too can become a
Brother over here.